Look at her uniform, one of the executives muttered, loud enough for the laughter around the lobby to spread. Damian Vance smirked, his tailored suit catching the marble light. She's drowning in it. Probably thinks she can hide what she ate for breakfast. Elena Morales kept her mop steady, her hand trembling only for a second before she tightened her grip. They didn't know. They couldn't know. If they had looked closer, if they had seen the faint rise beneath the oversized cloth, they would have realized she wasn't hiding weight. She was hiding life. That's the thing about secrets. They grow, whether or not the world is ready, and hers was about to become the only truth that mattered. So before we go any further, make sure you subscribe now, because what happens next, you don't want to miss when it drops. Elena straightened, letting the mop rest against the bucket. Her voice came quiet, steady. You shouldn't laugh at things you don't understand. The executives blinked at her, surprised she spoke at all. Damian's smirk only sharpened. She knew what they saw. A janitor too bold for her place. A woman meant to vanish into the background. What they didn't see, what she would never let them see until the moment demanded it, was the calm certainty of someone who had worn power before, who had stood in rooms where the only thing separating life from death was her decision. Beneath the cloth, beneath the mockery, Elena Morales still carried that certainty. And now she carried something even greater, her child. The sting of humiliation never lessened, no matter how many nights she mopped marble floors polished by people who never looked her in the eye. The smell of disinfectant clung to her hands long after her shift ended, a reminder of her station. Yet every time she folded that oversized uniform at home, she whispered to the child within her that this sacrifice had meaning. They thought she was invisible. She was not. They thought she was weak. She was not. They thought she was alone. She was not. And when the time came, the world would discover that the woman they mocked carried more than a mop bucket. She carried the training of a healer, the scars of survival, and the kind of resilience that billionaires could never purchase. Her gaze flickered to Damian. He didn't even recognize her. The man she once trusted, the man whose arrogance had driven her into shadows, looked right through her. For a moment, the ache almost broke her resolve. Almost. But Elena was not here to collapse. She was here to endure. So she pressed the mop forward again, silent, steady, unshaken. This was not the end. This was only the beginning. And Damian Vance, her estranged husband, her arrogant tormentor, had just chosen the wrong woman to humiliate. Tell me, where are you watching from? Because trust me, when he finally learns who she really is, you'll want a front row seat. The marble floor still gleamed from where Elena had passed her mop, but the echoes of laughter lingered in the lobby long after the executives had stepped into the boardroom. She lowered her eyes, refusing to let their words settle any deeper than the uniform already pressing against her. One hand drifted briefly, instinctively, to her side. A tiny gesture hidden by fabric. "Morales!" Mrs. Henderson's clipped voice cut across the corridor. The older woman's heels clicked like a metronome of disapproval. "You've got to move faster. The board doesn't want to see buckets and rags in the halls during meetings." "Yes, ma'am," Elena answered quietly, pushing her cart toward the service closet. She knew Mrs. Henderson wasn't cruel. The woman was caught between orders from above and the silent burden of managing people deemed replaceable. Still, every correction pressed Elena lower, folding her into the invisibility everyone expected. As she slid the cart into the closet, muffled voices carried down the hall. She froze, hearing her name. "Morales?" A man's laugh followed. You mean the one with the circus tent for a uniform? She's not even supposed to be here during high traffic hours. Another voice joined in, smooth and dismissive. Places like this aren't for people like her. We're running a billion-dollar firm, not a charity for strays. Elena's breath caught, her back pressed to the cold wall. She knew the sound of men convincing themselves they were gods. She had once sat in rooms where life and death decisions echoed with the same arrogance. Only back then, she had worn a white coat, not a janitor's badge. The mop handle pressed against her palm like an anchor, holding her steady as the words rolled past. She thought of her child again, of the future she refused to let be poisoned by the sneers of powerful men. They could dismiss her. They could call her invisible. But she knew invisibility was sometimes armor. The corridor smelled of wax and chemical lemon. Beyond the glass, the city skyline glittered. Wealth and power reflected back like 1,000 mocking eyes. Elena kept her head down, stepping carefully, carrying the weight of her secret with quiet determination. Damien's voice carried again, faint but unmistakable. He was boasting now, speaking about profits and acquisitions, laughing with men who mirrored his arrogance. Not once did his gaze turn to the woman who swept his floors. Not once did he recognize her. The sting burned sharper than the smell of bleach. She had once stood beside him, equal, trusted. Now she was background noise in his empire. Still, Elena didn't falter. She pressed forward, her pace even, her silence deliberate. If they wanted her unseen, she would play the role until the day came when their blindness cost them everything. Her shift dragged into evening, long after the boardroom emptied. She folded her mop and bucket back into the service closet, her muscles aching with more than labor. The oversized uniform hung loose around her shoulders. But beneath it, her child shifted faintly, a reminder that her strength was no longer just her own. At home, in her modest apartment, Elena eased the uniform from her shoulders and hung it carefully on a nail by the door. She sat for a moment, hands resting on her stomach, whispering softly into the quiet. They don't see you yet, but they will. On the table, a small stack of unopened envelopes waited. Rent, utilities, medical bills. Next to them lay a thin, worn folder. Inside were diplomas, licenses, and letters with her name embossed in gold. Proof of who she had been and who she still was, no matter how the world tried to erase her. She closed the folder gently, sliding it back into the drawer. The world didn't need to know yet. But one day, the truth would demand to be heard. For now, invisibility would keep her safe. For now, dismissal was her shield. But Elena Morales knew better than anyone. Shields can be turned into weapons. The hum of the vacuum cleaner stuttered, coughed once, and then gave up completely. Elena tugged the plug from the wall, frowning at the faint trail of smoke curling from the machine. Around her, the hallway lights gleamed too brightly, their polished glow reflecting against the spotless walls. No one else lingered at this hour, except the echoes of conversations still bouncing from the executive floor. Morales, Mrs. Henderson's voice again, sharp from down the hall. Why isn't that machine running? We're already behind schedule. These halls need to shine before morning. Elena crouched beside the vacuum, her movements calm, unhurried. Yes, ma'am, she answered, her tone steady. Her fingers brushed the cord, then the casing. She pressed her palm lightly against the housing and listened. A faint clicking noise told her what she needed to know. Don't just sit there, Henderson barked, adjusting her glasses as she stepped closer. If it's broken, write it up and move on. We'll requisition another. Elena didn't move away. She pulled a screwdriver from her cart, easing the back panel open. The burnt smell grew stronger. Henderson sighed heavily, but she didn't stop her. She'd long since learned that arguing with Morales was often wasted energy. "Looks like the motor overheated," Elena murmured, adjusting a wire with steady fingers. She could almost see the schematic in her mind, the way she once had with more complex machines. Monitors, ventilators, instruments that decided whether breath continued or stopped. Within minutes, she'd repositioned the wire and cleared a blockage. She snapped the panel back into place, pressed the switch, and the vacuum whirred to life again, steady and strong. Mrs. Henderson blinked, the lines on her face shifting between surprise and relief. "Well, lucky guess, I suppose." Elena didn't correct her. She simply rose, brushing her palms against her uniform. "It's working now. We can finish the floor before shift end." The older woman gave a short nod and hurried off, her heels clicking once more. Elena lingered for a moment, her gaze dropping to the humming machine. It was a simple repair, hardly worth noting, but her hands still carried the memory of complex fixes, of lives saved in sterile rooms far from marble floors. She rolled the vacuum forward, the sound blending into the low thrum of the building's air conditioning. The smell of fresh wax hung heavy, mixed with the faint scent of ozone from the motor. Each stroke across the carpet reminded her of what she once was, and what she could never allow them to see. Not yet. As she moved down the corridor, a pair of junior staffers passed by, chatting under their breath. One of them glanced her way. "She fixed that thing? Huh. Thought janitors only knew how to push 'em." The other chuckled. "Probably just dumb luck." Elena kept her eyes forward. She didn't need their approval. Every small act of competence reminded her that invisibility didn't erase her knowledge. It only made it more dangerous when revealed. At the far end of the hall, the executive elevator dinged open. Damien stepped out with 2 board members, his laughter sharp and confident. The men around him clutched leather briefcases, their cufflinks flashing under the lights. None of them gave the vacuuming janitor more than a passing glance. But Elena's heart stuttered for just a second. She felt the weight of his presence even as he walked past, his cologne mingling with the sterile sense of polish and machinery. He brushed so close she could hear his voice clearly. Arrogant, dismissive, wrapped in the certainty of wealth. "The deal will close by Friday. We'll announce it at the gala." His tone carried the authority of a man used to winning. Elena bent lower over the machine, forcing herself into the role of invisibility again. Her stomach tightened as the baby shifted, a reminder of the hidden bond he didn't even recognize. She willed her breath steady, her movements calm. The elevator doors closed behind him, the sound final and metallic. Elena straightened slowly, her hand resting briefly on her stomach. The vacuum purred beside her, steady and whole again. Small victories, quiet power. They didn't see it, but one day they would. The service corridor narrowed into silence, only the faint hum of the vacuum trailing behind her. Elena slid it back into the closet, her muscles aching from hours of work. She straightened her uniform, tugging the oversized fabric down across her body, and pressed the elevator button with a weary hand. The doors opened with a polished chime. Inside, Damien Vance stood with 2 board members, their briefcases gleaming, their suits crisp. His smile was effortless, commanding, the kind of expression that made investors lean closer and employees shrink. Elena hesitated for half a second. She could have waited for the next car, but Henderson's orders echoed in her mind. "Move faster. Don't linger where they can see you." She stepped in, keeping to the corner, her mop cart squeezed awkwardly at her side. The boardroom chatter never faltered. Damien leaned on the rail, gesturing with a hand that bore a watch worth more than her entire yearly salary. "We're closing the deal at the gala," he was saying, his tone smooth. "Investors love optics, and nothing says strength like eliminating inefficiencies before the quarter ends." One of the men chuckled. "Morales-level inefficiencies?" Elena froze, the name cutting sharp through the elevator's narrow space. Damien's lips curved in a smirk. "Exactly. Every empire has its wasted pieces. Some of them just happen to wear uniforms." The men laughed. The sound bounced off the mirrored walls, crowding the small box until Elena could barely breathe. She kept her gaze fixed on the glowing panel of numbers, willing herself not to flinch. But Damien noticed her stillness. His eyes shifted, settling on her reflection in the mirror. For a heartbeat, recognition flickered and vanished, like a shadow slipping behind glass. "You hear that, Janitor?" His tone was casual, sharp with amusement. "Don't take it personally. You're just background. The building looks cleaner when no one notices you at all." The board members chuckled again, the sound slicing at the edges of her resolve. Elena tightened her grip on the cart, her knuckles pale against the steel handle. Her child stirred faintly within her, a flutter that steadied her spine. She turned her face slightly, enough to meet his eyes in the mirror. "Sometimes the background holds more than you think," she said softly. One of the men shifted uncomfortably, the smirk faltering. Damien, however, let out a low laugh. "Philosophy from a mop bucket? Charming." The elevator dinged, opening onto the executive floor. They strode out, their polished shoes clicking in unison, carrying their laughter with them. Damien didn't look back. Elena exhaled slowly, the silence wrapping around her like armor. Her hands trembled, but her gaze was steady. She had endured humiliation before, but never with stakes like these. Not with a child's future pressing against her ribs, demanding more than silence. The doors closed again, sealing her in. For a moment, the elevator felt like a cage, polished steel and mirrored walls reflecting the contrast of worlds colliding. Hers, humble, hidden, heavy with sacrifice. His, arrogant, gleaming, careless in its cruelty. Elena pressed the button for the lobby, her heart pounding. The ride downward stretched endlessly. Each floor another reminder of how far she had fallen, and how far she would rise again when the time came. When the doors slid open, the lobby bustled with rife late-night activity. Assistants carrying files, security guards checking badges, a receptionist yawning behind polished glass. Elena pushed her cart forward, her movement steady, measured, as though nothing had happened. But inside, a fire kindled. The elevator had shown her more clearly than ever. Damien's world thrived on power displayed and weakness exploited. He had chosen to humiliate her without ever realizing who she was. One day, he would. And when that day came, the laughter would stop. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the glass atrium, gilding the corporate lobby in a glow that felt colder than it looked. Elena wheeled her cart across the floor, her mop water sloshing softly with each step. The executives who streamed past barely spared her a glance, their phones glued to their ears, their voices sharp with deals and deadlines. Near the reception desk, a small boy clung to his mother's skirt. His wide eyes darted nervously as the busy crowd surged around them. The mother whispered into her phone, distracted, tugging impatiently at his arm. The boy's breath quickened, his chest rising too fast. Elena noticed the trembling in his small hands, the panic in his eyes. She dropped the mop handle gently against the bucket and crouched low, her voice soft, calm, measured. "Hey," she said, her tone carrying a steadiness born of experience. "Look at me. Breathe with me. In and out." The boy blinked, his breaths uneven, but her calm presence cut through the noise. She tapped her chest gently, then her lips, showing him the rhythm. Slowly, shakily, he matched her. In, out, in, out. His shoulders eased, his small body no longer shaking so violently. The mother finally looked down, frowning. "What are you doing?" Elena stood carefully, her oversized uniform rustling. He was just a little overwhelmed. "He's fine now." The receptionist, who had been watching wide-eyed, spoke up before the mother could respond. "You know, Morales always has this way about her. My aunt swears she used to be someone important, a doctor or something." The mother's brows lifted skeptically as she tugged her son closer. "A doctor? Dressed like that?" She scoffed, shaking her head as she returned to her call. The boy glanced back once at Elena, offering a shy, grateful smile. She gave him a small nod, then picked up her mop again, blending back into the background as if nothing had happened. But the receptionist kept staring, curiosity lighting her features. She whispered to a coworker, "Told you. She's not just a janitor." The words drifted, faint but cutting, like a thread tugged loose from a tightly wound fabric. Elena felt the ripple. She had worked so hard to remain unseen, to bury the past beneath uniforms and silence. Yet invisibility couldn't always conceal truth, not when instincts betrayed her. She moved down the hall, each stroke of the mop deliberate, calm. Her mind replayed the boy's panic, the way her hands had moved without thought, her voice slipping effortlessly into patterns she hadn't used in years, patterns that belonged to the woman she once was. In the break room, Mrs. Henderson looked up as Elena entered. "You caused a stir out there." Elena kept her expression neutral, filling a bucket at the sink. "Just a child needing air." Henderson adjusted her glasses. "And yet, you handled it better than his mother." "Some of the staff are talking people talk," Elena murmured, wringing the mop. She avoided Henderson's gaze, but the supervisor's sharp eyes lingered. "Whatever you used to be, Morales, it doesn't matter now," Henderson said finally, her tone clipped, but not unkind. "Here, you're the janitor. Keep it that way." Elena gave no reply. She carried her bucket out of the room, the water sloshing quietly in rhythm with her steps. In the corridor, she passed Damien. His polished shoes clicked against the marble, his phone pressed to his ear. He didn't notice her at first, not until his gaze flickered briefly toward her. For a heartbeat, his eyes narrowed, as if something familiar tugged at the edges of memory. Then he looked away, laughing at something on the line, and swept past without another thought. Elena's stomach tightened, her hand brushing instinctively across the curve of her abdomen beneath the uniform. Her child shifted faintly, as though reminding her that invisibility would not last forever. The receptionist's words echoed in her mind. She used to be someone important. Yes, once. And one day, the world would remember. The hum of the city at night filtered through the thin walls of Elena's apartment. Car horns, distant laughter, and the rhythmic thud of bass from a passing car seeped into her small kitchen. She sat at the table, the oversized uniform draped neatly over a chair beside her. The cloth, still carrying the smell of bleach and disinfectant, seemed to hang like a shadow she could never quite escape. Her feet ached, her lower back burned, and the quiet weight beneath her ribs pressed insistently as her child shifted again. She pressed a palm to her stomach, whispering softly, "It's all right. We're all right." On the counter sat a stack of unopened envelopes. Rent overdue. utilities threatening disconnection, hospital bills from checkups she'd postponed too many times. She stared at them for a long moment, then slid them aside to reveal a folder she had left unopened for months. She hesitated. Her fingers hovered above the worn cardboard edges, as though touching it might unravel her carefully maintained invisibility. At last, she pulled it closer, flipping the cover open. Inside, the truth glared back at her. Diplomas, framed once but now dulled with dust. Licenses that bore her name, once spoken with respect. Letters of commendation from hospitals and peers who had once trusted her to hold life in her hands. Elena Morales, M.D. The title still looked foreign to her eyes after years of erasure. Her gaze blurred, tears threatening as she brushed a fingertip across the embossed lettering. That life had ended when Damien's empire grew and his arrogance hardened into something she could no longer fight against. She had walked away before his shadow consumed her completely, but she hadn't left empty-handed. Her unborn child stirred again, a faint kick beneath her palm. Elena smiled, even as her throat tightened. You'll never know me as anyone's background. Not ever. The knock of the refrigerator's compressor filled the silence. The apartment smelled faintly of old paint and detergent, a world away from the gleaming marble she cleaned each night. Yet here, surrounded by chipped countertops and secondhand furniture, Elena felt stronger than she ever had in the corporate towers. Still, the folder called to her. She stared at the diplomas as if they might betray her secret. It wasn't shame that made her hide them. It was strategy. The less anyone knew, the safer her child remained. She slid the documents back into the folder and returned it to the drawer. For now, invisibility was armor. For now, silence was survival. A sudden creak in the hallway startled her. Voices drifted through the thin walls, neighbors arguing about money, children crying in the next unit. Elena rose, locking the door even though she knew it wouldn't stop much if someone truly wanted in. She glanced at the folder once more before closing the drawer firmly. The weight of her day settled into her body, but sleep would not come easily. She moved to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see the skyline glowing in the distance. Damien's empire lit the night, his towers casting long shadows across the city. He lived in penthouses lined with glass. She lived in a room where every square foot carried memory and sacrifice. And yet, she knew which of them had chosen the harder strength. Elena pressed her forehead to the cool glass, her breath clouding it faintly. She closed her eyes, listening to the city's pulse, feeling her child's steady presence within her. Someday, she whispered, someday they'll know. The night stretched quiet around her, but her heart refused to bow. For all the marble lobbies and sharp suits that mocked her, she still carried truth in her bones. Truth stronger than wealth, truth that waited, patient, steady, unshakable. And when the moment came, Elena Morales would not hide anymore. The gala lights glimmered like a constellation, chandeliers casting golden fire over a sea of tailored suits and glittering gowns. The air smelled of champagne and orchids, the hum of conversation, punctuated by bursts of laughter that rolled across the ballroom like waves. Waiters carried trays of hors d'oeuvres, glasses clinking as investors toasted deals yet to be announced. At the far edge of the room, beneath the opulence, Elena Morales pushed her mop bucket across the polished floor. Her uniform looked even more out of place here, a drab shadow against the swirl of silk and velvet. The oversized fabric disguised her pregnancy well enough, but it couldn't disguise the sting of every eye that flickered past her and dismissed her. Damien Vance stood at the center of it all, surrounded by admirers. His tuxedo gleamed, his laughter sharp, each gesture a display of confidence cultivated for cameras and investors alike. His voice carried easily, sliding across the room with authority. "And this is how you build a legacy," he said, raising his glass, "by refusing to accept dead weight in your empire." His gaze flicked toward Elena, a smirk curling at the edges of his mouth. "You see, even here, we keep things tidy." A ripple of laughter followed. Heads turned, eyes landing on the janitor crouched at the edge of their celebration. Elena's cheeks burned, but she kept her motion steady, dipping the mop into the bucket and sweeping it across a spill near the bar. The smell of champagne mixed with disinfectant, the sound of laughter cutting sharper than the clink of crystal. One guest leaned toward Damien, his voice loud enough for Elena to hear. "Isn't it strange to keep staff in sight at an event like this?" "A little unsightly," Damien chuckled. "Transparency is everything. Investors should see how efficiently we keep the dirt under control." His words carried the weight of a joke, but the smirk in his eyes told Elena he meant every syllable. The laughter swelled again, and Elena lowered her gaze, her grip on the mop handle tightening. She felt the child stir inside her, a soft movement that reminded her she wasn't enduring this humiliation alone. She straightened, her eyes sweeping across the room. Glittering gowns, polished shoes, the clink of wealth celebrating itself. Every detail screamed of a world that had decided she no longer belonged. But Elena Morales knew better. She had once walked halls where decisions were measured not in dollars, but in heartbeats. At the edge of the bar, a waiter stumbled, a tray of champagne glasses crashing to the floor. The sharp sound silenced the room for a moment, crystal shards scattering across marble. Elena moved without hesitation, her mop gliding to catch the spill, her hands steady as she gathered the fragments. "Efficient, isn't she?" Damien's voice rang out again, his tone dripping with mockery. "Maybe we should promote her. Head of sanitation, anyone?" The crowd chuckled, some uncomfortably, others freely, their laughter filling the silence left by breaking glass. Elena's pulse pounded, but she kept her movements calm. She gathered the shards, the smell of spilled champagne heavy in the air, and rose with quiet dignity. She didn't respond, didn't falter, didn't give them the reaction they wanted. She caught sight of Mrs. Henderson standing near the doorway, her expression unreadable. For a moment, sympathy flickered across the older woman's face, but it vanished quickly under the weight of the room. Elena carried the shards to her cart, the sting of humiliation settling into her bones. Still, her gaze remained steady, her spine unbroken. The gala continued around her, the laughter fading back into chatter, but the memory of mockery hung thick in the air. She returned to her corner, dipping the mop once more, her mind a storm of silence. Damien's arrogance echoed in her chest, but so did the reminder that arrogance often faltered in crisis. And when it did, those who had been dismissed became the only ones who mattered. For now, she played the role. For now, she endured. But the cracks in his empire were closer than he realized, and Elena Morales knew exactly how quickly luxury could shatter. The gala pressed on, music swelling from a string quartet tucked into the corner, the scent of roses and champagne filling the air. Guests drifted between tables, draped in white linen, their laughter a constant hum beneath the sparkle of chandeliers. Elena lingered at the far edge of the room, her mop gliding across the marble where a spilled drink had stained the shine. Her arms ached, every muscle felt weighted, heavy with exhaustion. She had been on her feet since dawn, first scrubbing stairwells, then polishing corridors, and now crouching under the gaze of people who barely saw her. Sweat trickled beneath the stiff fabric of her oversized uniform, clinging to her skin. She pressed the mop back into the bucket, her hands trembling faintly. The child within her shifted again, stronger this time, pressing against her ribs as if demanding rest. Elena straightened, gripping the cart for balance. For a moment, the room swayed, crystal chandeliers blurring, music bending into a dull hum. "Morales!" Mrs. Henderson's sharp voice cut from the doorway. "Keep moving!" The East Corridor still needs clearing before the investors' tour. Elena nodded, though her throat felt too tight to answer. She pushed the cart forward, the wheels rattling softly against the marble. Each step dragged heavier than the last, her body demanding what her pride refused to allow. As she reached the quieter hall, just beyond the ballroom, the facade cracked. Her knees buckled, sending her hand slamming against the wall for support. The mop clattered to the floor, the sound echoing down the empty corridor. Her breath came shallow, uneven. Sweat beaded across her brow. She pressed her palm against her stomach, whispering under her breath, "Stay with me. We're almost through tonight." The corridor was cooler here, but the chill didn't ease the heat coursing through her body. She slid slowly down the wall until she sat on the floor, her back pressed against the cold marble. For a moment, she allowed her eyes to close, her chest rising and falling with effort. Memories flickered unbidden. Bright hospital lights, the rhythm of monitors, her own voice calm and steady as she gave orders that once carried weight. She had been the one others leaned on when panic struck. Now she was the one fighting collapse in silence. Footsteps echoed, sharp, against the polished floor. A pair of waiters passed, carrying trays toward the ballroom. One glanced her way, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the janitor slumped against the wall. He hesitated, whispering to his companion, "She doesn't look good." The other shook his head. "Not our problem. Henderson will deal with it." They moved on, their voices fading with the music. Elena drew a slow, steadying breath. She would not fall here, not in the shadows where no one cared. She pressed her palms against the floor and pushed herself upright, her body trembling, but her gaze sharp. Her child deserved more than surrender. She retrieved the mop, her grip firm despite the tremor in her hands, and pushed the cart toward the East Corridor. The bucket wheels squeaked in protest, echoing louder than the orchestra's strings. In the ballroom behind her, Damien's voice rose above the chatter. Smooth, commanding, certain. He was boasting again. About profits, about deals, about legacy. Every word laced with the arrogance of a man who had never known exhaustion like hers. Elena paused at the corridor's end, her breath shallow, her vision still hazy. She rested her forehead briefly against the mop handle, whispering softly, "Not yet. Not here." The silence around her felt heavier than the music spilling from the ballroom. She knew her body couldn't hold this pace forever. Something would have to break. And when it did, Damien Vance and his empire would finally learn what strength looked like. Not in chandeliers and champagne, but in the resilience of the woman they had mocked into invisibility. The gala had reached its peak, the orchestra swelling with triumphant notes as Damien Vance raised his glass. Spotlights painted him in gold, investors circling like moths to flame. Cameras flashed, capturing his smile, the tuxedo, the glint of the watch that symbolized success. At the edge of the crowd, waiters moved swiftly between tables, their trays glimmering with champagne. The scent of roses hung heavy in the air, almost suffocating. Elena stood near the entrance, her mop cart tucked into the shadows. Every movement of her aching body reminded her of the strain she carried. Yet she stayed, steady, invisible. Then came the sound that shattered the night. A piercing cry, shrill and desperate. Gasps spread like wildfire through the ballroom as a small figure crumpled near the center of the floor. Maya Vance, Damien's daughter, lay on the polished marble, her little hands clawing at her throat, her breaths sharp and strangled. A glass of juice lay spilled beside her, the bright liquid staining the floor like warning. The music screeched to a halt. Guests froze, some standing, others crowding closer, their chatter turning frantic. Damien's voice cut above the noise, urgent for the first time all evening. "Call a doctor! Somebody call emergency services!" He dropped to his knees beside his daughter, his hands shaking as he tried to steady her. "Maya, breathe, sweetheart. Stay with me," a woman in pearls shrieked. "She's choking." Another man barked toward the servers. "Does anyone here know first aid?" But the guests only hovered, panic widening their eyes. The wealth in the room meant nothing against the sight of a child's face turning pale, her chest fighting for breath. Elena's body moved before her mind caught up. She left the cart behind, pushing through the crowd with a steadiness that silenced some of the noise. "Move," she said firmly, her voice carrying a calm authority that didn't belong to a janitor. "Give her space." Damien looked up, wild-eyed, ready to lash out. "What are you doing here? Get back!" But Elena ignored him. She knelt at Maya's side, her hands already assessing, her eyes sharp and focused. The little girl's lips were swelling, her throat tight. Not choking, anaphylaxis. "She's having an allergic reaction," Elena said, her tone precise. "Does anyone have an epinephrine injector?" The crowd blinked, confused, frozen. One waiter stammered. No, we—" Elena's jaw tightened. Of course they didn't. She pressed 2 fingers to Maya's neck, feeling the rapid, panicked pulse. Her breaths came shorter, her chest fighting. The reaction was escalating fast. Damien's face crumpled, his voice breaking. "Do something, please!" Elena's hands moved with a speed that startled those watching. She tilted Maya's head, keeping her airway open, speaking calm instructions, even as the child fought for air. "Stay with me, sweetheart. Just stay with me." The crowd pressed closer, their jewels and suits glinting under the lights. The janitor they had dismissed now commanded the room. Mrs. Henderson appeared at the edge of the circle, her face pale. She whispered to someone beside her. "She knows exactly what she's doing." Elena's mind raced. Emergency services were minutes away. Minutes Maya didn't have. She scanned the room, searching. "Ice!" she barked suddenly. "Now!" Anything cold. Towels. Napkins. "Bring them." Waiters scattered, rushing for the kitchen. Elena eased Maya's body against her lap, her hand steady against the child's chest. The girl's breaths wheezed, but the steady tone of Elena's voice cut through the panic. Damien watched, his entire empire crumbling into helplessness as the woman he had mocked took control. His hand hovered near his daughter's arm, useless. His lips trembled. "Please, save her." Elena's jaw clenched. Not for him, not for his empire, for the child, for Maya, for the life that deserved more than arrogance. The crowd's whispers swelled. "Isn't she just a janitor? She knows more than the rest of us. She used to be someone important." The ice arrived, wrapped in linen. Elena pressed it gently against Maya's throat, lowering the swelling just enough to keep her airway from closing completely. The girl gasped, her breaths ragged but returning. The room erupted in sighs of relief, gasps and muffled tears. Damien's shoulders sagged, his eyes locked on Elena. Recognition hovered there now, not full, but close. as though her calm voice was reaching through the fog of his arrogance. Elena didn't meet his gaze. Her focus stayed on Maya, steady and unshakable. "You're all right. Just breathe with me. That's it. In and out." For the first time, the ballroom was silent. The chandelier still glimmered. The roses still perfumed the air. But every guest now stared at the janitor, who wasn't supposed to matter, saving the only life that did. The ballroom had fallen into a stunned hush. Damien's daughter still lay in Elena's lap, her breathing shallow but steadier now. The linen-wrapped ice glistened against her throat, condensation dripping onto Elena's oversized uniform. The guests crowded in a wide circle, their jewels and tuxedos catching the chandelier light, but none dared move. Elena's voice was calm, precise, cutting through the silence. "She's stabilizing, but she'll need epinephrine as soon as paramedics arrive. If someone doesn't run to the lobby right now and clear a path, she'll lose precious minutes." Her tone wasn't a request. It was an order. A man in a gray suit, startled, nodded and bolted toward the entrance. Others shifted nervously, as though waiting for someone to tell them what to do. For years, these were people who commanded rooms with signatures and contracts. Tonight, they obeyed the janitor crouched on the floor. Damien knelt close, his face drawn tight, the arrogance stripped from his eyes. "How do you know all this?" His voice cracked under the weight of desperation. Elena looked at him briefly, her expression steady, almost cold. "Because I've done it before." Hundreds of times a ripple spread through the crowd. Whispered fragments carried, "She's trained. She's not just staff. She sounds like a doctor." Mrs. Henderson's face had gone pale, her hand clutching the doorway. Her eyes flicked from Elena to Damien, and for the first time, pity flickered across her stern features. Damien's gaze narrowed, confusion warring with dawning recognition. "Who are you?" he whispered. Elena ignored the question, adjusting Maya's position to keep her airway clear. She kept her voice low and soothing to the child. "You're safe. Just stay with me. Keep breathing. In and out." The sirens wailed faintly outside, growing closer, their sound slicing through the ballroom's oppressive quiet. The crowd shifted, restless, unsure of whether to step back or lean closer. Elena didn't flinch. Every movement was deliberate, practiced, unshakable. When the paramedics finally rushed in, she met them with a swift summary. Anaphylaxis, juice exposure, swelling controlled temporarily with cold compress, airway still at risk. She needs epinephrine immediately. The lead. Medic blinked, surprised at the clarity, then nodded. "Got it." They moved quickly, administering the injection. The girls' breaths easing almost instantly. Relief spread like a tide through the crowd, guests exhaling in shaky unison. Damien clutched his daughter's hand, his face buried against her hair. His shoulders shook once. A man stripped of all the power he thought defined him. He turned to Elena, voice hoarse. "You saved her. I don't understand. How could you know exactly what to do?" Elena rose slowly, her uniform damp with sweat and ice, her face shadowed by exhaustion. The crowd parted instinctively, their eyes wide, their whispers rising. She met Damien's gaze, her expression calm, but edged with something unyielding. "Because once, long before you decided I was invisible, I was a doctor." The words hung heavy in the air, striking harder than any insult, sharper than any boast. Guests gasped, some covering their mouths, others exchanging stunned looks. The janitor they had mocked, dismissed, humiliated, standing in the center of their wealth, had just revealed herself as someone they never deserved. Damien's lips parted, his face a mask of disbelief. He looked at her as though seeing her for the first time, recognition clawing at the edges of memory. Elena didn't waver. She stood taller, the mop bucket forgotten, the uniform now nothing more than a disguise that had served its purpose. Her child shifted faintly within her, and she pressed a hand to her stomach, silent but resolute. The paramedics wheeled Maya toward the exit, Damien following close behind. But his eyes never left Elena. For the first time in years, his certainty faltered, and the crowd that had laughed at her only hours before watched in silence, their respect unspoken, but unmistakable. The balance had shifted. The humiliation was no longer hers to carry. The night air outside the ballroom was sharp, carrying the wail of sirens as the ambulance pulled away. Guests spilled into the marble lobby in clusters, their voices hushed and unsettled. The gala that had been a showcase of Damien Vance's power now felt fractured, shaken by a single revelation no one could ignore. Elena stood near the service corridor, her mop cart forgotten behind her. The oversized uniform hung damp against her frame, ice-stained and wrinkled. But she held herself with a quiet dignity that made people hesitate before walking past. Every pair of eyes that had once dismissed her now carried unease, respect, curiosity. Damien re-entered through the glass doors, his tuxedo disheveled, his tie pulled loose. Maya had been stabilized and sent to the hospital for overnight monitoring. He should have looked triumphant for weathering a crisis. But his expression was something no one in the building had ever seen on his face before. Raw, uncertain, vulnerable. His gaze locked on Elena across the lobby. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. You, his voice cracked, and he stepped closer, disbelief shaking through each word. You're not. Elena's eyes didn't flinch. I was never just a janitor. The guests stilled, conversations cutting off. The words rippled like stone striking water. Damien's face tightened, memory pulling pieces together. The steadiness in her voice, the precision in her hands, the calm that had once steadied him during sleepless nights years ago. He knew it now. Elena. The name left his mouth as both recognition and confession. A murmur swept through the crowd. Henderson stepped forward, her usually stern face unreadable. She looked between Damien and Elena, understanding dawning. Damien's steps faltered as he came within reach. All this time, it was you? You disappeared, and then, God, you've been here, working under my nose? His eyes dropped, catching the faint movement beneath her oversized uniform. His voice broke. And you're... Elena's hand shifted instinctively over her stomach. She didn't answer, but the truth was undeniable. The crowd inhaled sharply, whispers sparking again like fire through dry grass. Damien's face went pale. My child? The words barely carried, strangled by the weight of regret. For the first time, Elena allowed her gaze to harden fully. You didn't recognize me when I stood right in front of you. You mocked me, humiliated me, reduced me to background noise. And now you ask whose child this is? His jaw tightened, shame flickering across his features. The man who had boasted of legacy and empire now looked stripped bare. Elena, I didn't know. You didn't want to know, she corrected, her tone quiet, but sharp enough to cut. The guests watched, transfixed. Power had shifted, visible and undeniable. Damien Vance, Billionaire CEO, was no longer the untouchable figure commanding the room. He was a man laid low by a truth he couldn't spin, a history he couldn't erase. He reached out as if to steady himself on the edge of her cart, his voice trembling. Why didn't you tell me? Why hide? Elena straightened, her spine firm. Because invisibility was safer than being destroyed by your arrogance, because my child deserved more than the shadow of your empire." Silence fell again. Even Henderson lowered her gaze, unable to mask the weight of Elena's words. Damien staggered back a step, his composure shattered. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I can—" Elena stopped him with a look, calm, unshaken, resolute. "This isn't about what you deserve. It's about what I will no longer allow." The marble lobby echoed with the finality of her words. Around them, the guests understood. The empire that had mocked her had been undone not by wealth, but by truth revealed in the hands of the woman they had tried to erase. Elena turned away, her hand resting protectively against her stomach. The janitor uniform no longer looked like a disguise. It looked like armor. Damien Vance stood in the ruins of his certainty, watching the woman he had scorned reclaim her dignity in front of everyone. The marble lobby gleamed beneath the fading glow of the chandeliers. Guests still lingered in clusters, their voices hushed, their eyes darting between Damien Vance and the woman he had once mocked into invisibility. The gala that was meant to crown his empire had ended with a revelation no investor could spin. Elena Morales stood at the base of the grand staircase, her mop cart pushed to one side, no longer her shield. The oversized uniform still draped across her shoulders, but it no longer looked like defeat. Tonight, it had carried her through humiliation into vindication. Mrs. Henderson approached slowly, her sharp features softened. For a moment, she looked as though she might speak, an apology, a confession, but Elena shook her head gently. "You don't need to say it," she murmured. "You saw what they all saw." The older woman nodded, stepping back with quiet respect. Damien stood a few feet away, the weight of silence pressing against him harder than any investor's glare. His tuxedo, once immaculate, was rumpled. His voice, once so commanding, had faltered into silence. For the first time in years, he looked like a man undone. "Elena," his tone was softer now, almost pleading, "you saved her life. You saved our daughter." Elena's eyes flickered to him, steady and calm. "I didn't save her for you." She rested a hand over her stomach, her gaze unyielding. "I saved her because every life matters, even when the world refuses to see it." The murmurs swelled. Guests exchanged glances, whispers sharp with realization. The janitor was no janitor. The woman mocked beneath chandeliers had carried more authority in crisis than any executive in the room. Damien stepped closer, his voice low. "I was blind. I didn't see you. I didn't see any of it. But if you'll let me—" Elena straightened, her hand steady against her unborn child. "No, you had your chance to see me. You chose not to. Tonight, the world saw me. And that's enough." Her words rang through the lobby, calm but final. And for once, no one dared laugh. No one dared dismiss her. She turned, pushing the mop cart only far enough to leave it by the service door. Then she walked toward the exit. Every step measured, every stride reclaiming the dignity they had tried to strip away. The janitor uniform was no longer a disguise. It was a reminder of what she had endured and what she had overcome. Outside, the city air hit cool against her skin. Lights glittered across the skyline, towers reaching upward as if trying to touch the stars. Elena drew a deep breath, her hand pressed protectively over her stomach. For the first time in years, she felt lighter, stronger, seen. Behind her, the glass doors reflected Damien's figure, motionless, watching her leave. His empire had not crumbled tonight, but his certainty had. And Elena knew that was a wound money could never heal. She whispered softly to the life within her, a promise forged from quiet strength. You'll never live in anyone's shadow. Not mine, not his. She stepped forward into the night, dignity intact, the silence of vindication more powerful than any applause. And for everyone watching, one truth remained unshakable. Elena Morales was no longer invisible. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Pregnant single mom janitor swept the floor in tears. The investor realized she once saved his life. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?